Excellent.
Hello and welcome to this week's Facebook and LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much to everyone that is logging on and watching today. Please do give us a like or an emoji as you log on. Let us know if you can hear us all okay. If there are any problems with sound. Today, I'm really excited to be chatting with Dr. Victoria Stakelum, and we're going to be talking all about how you can progress your career without compromising your values. So I'm really excited to be chatting with Victoria. She's from a company called The Success Smith. So she's going to be talking to us a little bit about the Success Smith and who she helps. And then we're going to be talking loads more about how you can progress your career without compromising on your values, which I know that is, such a huge topic at the moment. I think it's something that can hold people back, that fear as well. So thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to chat with you and talk more about this topic. So before we dive into today's live, I want to give people a bit of an overview as to what you do and who you help and what the Success Smith is.
Yes. So the Success Smith was founded a couple of years ago when I left my corporate world. I'm a psychologist, coach, and NLP master, amongst other things. And we are all about helping high integrity women create success in their careers, particularly, but in their lives more generally. And that takes two kind of halves, if you like. It's a lot to do with dealing with the emotional stuff that gets in our way and holds us back, and releasing those emotional blocks so that we can be at full power and kind of fully aligned and powerful at what we do. And then it's also about developing the skill set to know how to navigate and negotiate as you progress up the career ladder. So my background, I had a big corporate career. I was quite successful. I was a deputy CEO and executive shareholder before I was 40. And I was often the only woman at the top table, and I learned a lot about how to be effective within those environments. And also, in my own life, I'm big into meditation, deeply into personal development. And I've also learned what are the critical things you need to master within yourself to have that kind of career success, but crucially, to have it in a way that's aligned and sustainable and manageable, and where you don't feel like you're having to do some dance or pretend to be something you're not, or throw out your work-life balance and run yourself into the ground, which we see so much. Look at what's just happened in New Zealand,
Yeah,
and then so women can't have it all after all. We can, but we have to know when to hold our boundaries. So the Success Smith essentially equips women with the skill set and the mindset and the emotional release to be completely fulfilled and successful on our own terms, which is a wonderful gift to have as your day job, I have to say.
Absolutely. Do you know what you just said? It reminds me a little bit, I wonder if you've read that book, Lean In.
I have, and I didn't love it.
Yeah,
and I can't remember enough about it, but I can't remember enough about it to know exactly why I didn't love it. But
I feel like it was a long time ago I read it as well, so my memory would be a bit hazy, but it was sort of saying a bit about how women needed to change and lean in, and I suppose in my mind, mold themselves to a more patriarchal definition of success in order to be successful.
Right. And I think that's true. And if you look at Lean In, and if you look at any of the most kind of well-known, highly regarded leadership books, with the exception of Lean In, they're all written by men, right? And then you've got Lean In, which basically says, get like them if you want to be successful. And so I'm writing a book. It'll take me ages. I love the work I do with my clients. But I think we need to redefine what it means to be a woman in leadership. My personal success, progressing up to very top leadership, was not about being patriarchal or adopting the kind of historical structures or leadership models. I was extremely empathetic. I was very much myself. And that meant sometimes I was having a bad day and I wouldn't hide it. But it did require me to step into my power a little bit, my feminine power. And so I did sometimes straight talk, which maybe people associate with a more male model of leadership, but it was never political. And and it was always compassionate, which I think is a trait that perhaps comes more naturally to women. I'm always wary of making kind of big claims on gender stuff, but I feel like it's generally accepted women intuitively move more towards compassion and communication, and I feel like that did embody my leadership style. But there are a lot of other things I've observed, both through my years leading women, which I have done for decades, and also these days, the many, many women I serve as their coach and mentor, to support them in their careers. We often carry stuff that gets in our way. So fear might stop us from speaking out when it's really important that we speak out, or I don't know, feeling a need to conform to a certain style in order to be seen as appropriately assertive has us kind of act in this disjointed way that isn't really us at all, and then we feel weird and not in our right selves. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which we can inadvertently hold ourselves back. And so what I love is helping women connect to their personal power, get comfortable with it, realize the game-changing effect of unapologetically filling your space. I don't know
I
how else
love
to say it.
that. Yeah, no,
Unapologetically filling your space. I don't mind whether you're leaning in or leaning back, because to be honest, different situations call for different treatments.
and some days you want to lean in, some days you want to lean back.
Exactly. And some days, particularly if you've got a family, you need to lean out.
Yeah.
But having the courage to say that, and this is why, and I know a lot of your audience, Elizabeth, are women working part-time or needing flexible working, and developing the courage and self-worth to hold your line on negotiation around those sorts of things. I cover a lot of that kind of thing as well in my program. So I just want to see more high integrity women confidently find their place at the top table and not block themselves because they're scared that it will be too much pressure when they get there, or that they will be blocked for causes outside of themselves. Because I truly believe that women make incredible leaders. And I don't mean they're better or worse than men, different, complementary. We need to see more balance at the top of business. So I'm sort of on a mission to put more women into a place where they're able and confidently willing to be there, because I think the business world would be better. Business will perform better, but also cultures will be better. And
I was going to say society will be better. Everybody, even if you're not going to be a leader yourself, it benefits you to see, more women representing, especially when your needs in business, politics, and
let's
organizations.
Change the game so that the daughters that come after us, in fact, all of our children, just it's a better vibe. And I do think we can sometimes hold ourselves back a little bit. But we might think that it's things outside of ourselves holding us back. But there's an interplay between those two things: what's happening within us emotionally and what we're experiencing around us within our working environment. There's a really powerful interplay, but we often think it's the environment blocking us. But when we make little adjustments within ourselves, the game changes completely.
So I know there's some stats that sort of show that men are much more likely to raise their hand and ask for a pay rise. And I'm sure, I haven't got those stats, but I'm sure it's probably true that they put their hand up as well and ask for those promotions. Why do you think women historically maybe have been a bit nervous about putting their hands up and progressing potentially? Obviously not all women, again, I'm making a generalization, but there are more, I think, is it more men that are more people that are CEOs that are called Steve than there are women in the FTSE?
Oh my God, that's a terrible
something
one,
like it's something, it's some ridiculous stat. So, what do you think potentially puts some women off raising their hand and going for those promotions and big roles?
So I think one of the biggest factors, and I don't know why this is more prevalent amongst women, but my experience says that self-worth can have a lot to do with it. So we are not wholly clear on our own value. And so then we feel apologetic or nervous about asking for someone else to pay us that value or to recognize our value. And actually, I have an entire toolkit dedicated to quantitatively assessing your value by looking at the direct and indirect commercial impact the work that you do has on your organization. And when women do that, it can really, or here's another one. And whether you're working part-time or full-time, I often invite women to calculate the cash value of the overtime they work that they don't ask to be remunerated for.
Mm-hmm.
And often, particularly with women working full-time, because you're into bigger numbers on base salary there anyway, my clients have calculated that they might be gifting to their employer 5, 10, 15,000 pounds worth in hours on an annual basis. So I think first thing, sometimes we do not recognize our own worth, and maybe it's because we're not as clear on the language and calculation of our worth. Maybe it's because we haven't understood how to quantify more qualitative attributes in the space that we work. And for many of us, sometimes it's just we were taught to be valuable for being meek and quiet and
not rock the
sweet
boat.
and permissive and not rock the boat. And so we don't realize that actually we can be really valuable for speaking out and for our opinions and for all of this. So I think self-worth can play a part in it. I think fear, and to a degree, fear of rejection or humiliation can play a part of it. So in a way, we don't want to ask because we don't want to get a no.
Yep.
Maybe because it would feel awful and embarrassing and uncomfortable, or maybe because it would trigger in us feelings of rejection that we're not ready to take on.
And do you think women are more likely to experience that fear of rejection than men?
I think women are much more likely to experience that fear of rejection. And I think maybe we're a bit more used to tolerating doing stuff that we don't love because we feel that it just has to be done. And, just to give a silly example, like the washing up.
Yeah, I was going to think about the washing.
We're sort of used to just plugging along with tasks that we don't love because the expectation is that it will be us that plugs along with those tasks. Similarly, if we're in a job that we're not loving, we're not really feeling, we're sort of cultivated to just stick with it because maybe I'm lucky to have a job right now and there's a lot going on in the world and I don't want to rock the boat or I don't want to risk insecurity. I think, there's a lot of biological evolutionary stuff around men having a higher orientation around taking risk. It's to do with testosterone. Get a woman pushing heavy weights, her appetite for risk will increase because it's hormonal and biological. So we are actually wired to be slightly more risk averse. The problem with that is it can mean we often long tolerate things we shouldn't tolerate.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens is over time, we can become gradually quite resentful and frustrated because we know we're not happy and we know we're being undervalued and overworked and overlooked and underappreciated. And that does breed resentment. The bit that we don't always notice is that it's only possible because we are allowing it. No one can do that to us unless we're giving implicit permission. So we sit there hating it, being frustrated, and over time getting more and more cranky and miserable with it. But we forget that it's a choice. And we'll often say, well, it's not really a choice because I've got to pay the mortgage and this has got to happen and that's got to happen. It is actually still a choice. And one of the things that sometimes is a bit of an aha moment for people is when I really examine the alternatives. I could consider looking for another job and there's a bit of fear of the unknown and I might not have confidence that I'm going to land that other job. You always do, by the way, when you go after it. I've got lovely case studies of that all over the place. But, I might be a bit fearful of that, or I might not feel good enough, or I might not feel ready, all the emotional stuff that needs working through. Or it might be, I'm going to leave the job with nothing to go to. It's making me that miserable. And then I'm in total terror of the unknown. What if I lose my house? What if I can't feed my kids? When you actually explore those options, if you then decide to stay put, all of a sudden it becomes more manageable because you've looked seriously at what the alternative could be, which is...
But it was a worst case scenario, isn't it? You've looked at
it's a worst case scenario and you've said, either I'm willing to dance with that. And in my experience, typically, even when people make that quite dramatic move, they always make it work. I've never yet had someone who ends up destitute because they left a job they hated. They get into a bit of contracting or they miraculously land an amazing job that has them in full alignment, So we often feel this sense of trappedness and we're just going through the motions because we've forgotten that if we actually pause and look at it, our fulfillment or our happiness and our stress levels are actually worth exploring alternative options. The
Yeah.
other thing I think that can happen is it's a bit of a cycle. So if I'm already stressed and overwhelmed, having a really rough time, I might desperately want to change, but to change might require a near-term bump in my stress, because applying for jobs and putting yourself out there, that can feel quite stressful.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then, because I don't want to take on that additional stress, I stay with what I'm doing, even though that in itself is really stressful. So it can be a bit of, you can be locked into a loop. And really the trick is twofold. It's to break the loop by taking action, even though that action is uncomfortable or might be a bit fear-inducing. It's also to develop some physiological strategies to manage that stress. So basic breathing exercises, of which I can share some actually for your audience, if that's useful to people.
Yeah.
Simple grounding exercises, feel the breath coming in through my nose, feel the palms of my hands and the air against them. Just little daily practices to help moderate my stress levels can
Yeah.
actually open up space to choose something different if I'm really miserable where I am.
Mm.
But you've got to wake up to the fact, if you're really not in a good place, be awake to it, be alert to it, and start thinking about your options, because it's very easy to sort of stay on autopilot, tolerating, the bad boss or the
Yeah.
inflexible working conditions or the not being paid your worth, because, good old
Yeah.
Elizabeth, she'll always pull it out
Yeah,
the
you'll
bag.
always do it. She's a good team
She's a
player.
good girl, good team player, very
Yeah.
committed. So it's very
Yeah.
easy to get, when you're lovely, it's very easy to get taken advantage of.
And
People,
actually, you know what? It's not money, is it? But it's quite nice to get that. Oh, you're such a good team player. You're really helpful. And that does feed something in you, doesn't it? And then you think,
that
oh,
is
yeah.
that is so true. So one of the things I often work with clients on, I would call that an external locus of self-worth,
Mm,
where we need other people to say, "You're such a great girl, you're doing a great job." So often what we work on is moving that internally so that we don't need it. We still
yeah.
appreciate it, but we don't need it. And that empowers people to make better choices for themselves. Because let me tell you, once your boss realizes that as long as they keep saying thank you and patting you on the head and telling you're a good girl, you will take every extra project, stay late every night. Once you've trained them to have you in that shape of work, it's extremely difficult to retrain them. It can be done.
Interesting.
And a lot of people think that to set that boundary, you have to stop being lovely. A lot of people think, well, I'm either being the good girl that everyone
Yeah.
loves,
Or a
or I'm
bitch.
being the hard artist. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That combination of being really firm on my boundaries, but being a lovely person with it, I attribute my career success to that. And it's perfectly learnable, but it requires uncomfortable practice. It does require some
I'm
uncomfortable
going to
practice.
ask you to give us some tips in a minute, but Tara said one of her previous bosses told her to claim for any extra hours she did. She said that men would. It was a real eye opener and a positive example of leadership. She would probably have just continued to assume the extra hours were expected as part of her day rate. We're having to work long hours as one of our suppliers had let them down.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good, boss.
Really good, really, and how lovely to have a boss that was saying that, rather than saying, "Well, just do it for the next couple of months and then we'll
Yeah.
sort it
Can you
out."
just do this? Can you just stay for an extra 10, 15 or whatever it is? But then it all does add up, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. And the other thing, and we were just I have a group coaching program. We were just talking about this week, is when something goes wrong, and can you just like bridge the gap for us just for the next month or two while we rehire this or line up a new
Yeah.
supplier? And so you're taking on all this extra workload without any expectation of extra recompense or some kind of trade-off elsewhere. And then they realize, oh, she can actually handle that. Maybe we don't need to rush to get that replacement in, or maybe we don't need to rush that supplier. We're
Yeah.
very good at making ourselves indispensable. And the problem with
Absolutely.
being indispensable is it's very difficult to move up. And it's also very difficult to shift the kind of boundaries around your workload.
Move across or whatever. So this is interesting. So I'm sure there's people watching this, and I felt like this as well. You're in a role, maybe someone has left, and then they go, we just need you to cover their work or do extra or whatever it is while we hire somebody. And you actually don't want to say no because you don't want to seem unhelpful, you don't want to seem incompetent,
Yeah.
but it is stressful. So what advice would you give to people about saying no and setting those boundaries?
Yeah.
But doing it in
Okay.
a way that doesn't make you look like you're rubbish at your job.
Yeah. Or that no person. No one wants to be that no person. The very first thing I would say is, in that moment, if you are given to being a yes person, often what will happen is you've agreed to it before you've even had a chance to think about the impact of it on your world. So the very first piece of advice I would say is, have a back pocket phrase that feels you, that's the way you speak, that buys you time. So it might look like, I just need to reflect on that, or let me just check how that's going to look against my workload. I'll get back to you. And it might start with, it sounds like a great opportunity, and I need to just look at my overall priorities and workload, and I'll get back to you. So and the reason I say have something prepared is because when you're in the habit of yes, yes will fall out of your mouth, and then then it's much harder to wind back. Whereas if you have a let me get back to you phrase that feels about right for when those moments occur, and like, I know it's cheesy, practice saying it in front of the mirror, practice saying it 5 times a day, so that whenever you're hit with that. And by the way, it's also a really useful one, those moments when you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to, or a fact, and your inclination is to pretend you know the answer or bumble something. It's also really helpful to then, I don't know, but let me get back to you. So my first advice is, have something like that ready to buy yourself time. Then I would actually look at that task or responsibility relative to your other tasks and responsibilities, and relative to the opportunity it might present, and decide for yourself, if there were no consequences, what would I choose? Would I want to take this on, or would I not? If you wouldn't, then when you go back, I think the trick is to illustrate how many other responsibilities you have going on right now, and say, in light of all of this, I would love to be involved with this additional responsibility, but it's clear to me that I couldn't do justice to it. Something would have to drop somewhere because I'm already at full capacity. And that's how you politely decline. So it's not about you not being good enough. It's about you already being at full capacity and being sufficiently focused on quality delivery that you would have to compromise that in order to take it on. So that's if you want to say no. If you want to say yes, because it's actually a great opportunity, but you can also see that to say yes would cause you loads of pressure.
Yep.
Then you look at your workload, same process as when you're saying no, and you say, I really want to say yes to this. I really want to take it on, but I can see that at the moment my capacity means I wouldn't be able to. I would love to look at what I could deprioritize in order to make it possible for me to take this on. And that deprioritization might look like ditch some of what you do. It might look like delegate some of what you do, or it might look like defer some of what you do. So by having that conversation with whoever is inviting you to take that opportunity, you are together agreeing, I'll do it, but this will have to come off the list, which is, again, really sensible and good management. It shows that you are able to hold a boundary. I mean, to briefly jump out onto this boundaries thing, if you teach people that you'll say yes even when you can't deliver, they won't respect you and you'll end up not being able to deliver. None of that is good for your career. You are much better off saying, I really want to do it, but I'll prioritize this, so that you genuinely can deliver with quality and get involved in something. So that's the second scenario. You want to say yes, but you need to get a few other things off. The third thing you might want to consider, and this depends on how good you are at managing stress, whether you have any capacity, or whether you are willing to stretch yourself in terms of working hours and stress over the next month, or however long this project or responsibility is going to be, is to think, yes, but I'll want paying extra for it. So then what you're looking at is, what is the value of me taking on this additional responsibility? And let me give you an example of this. Let's imagine that a member of my team leaves and I'm being asked to cover a portion or all of their work over the time that they've left. And we think it's going to take 2 months to hire their replacement. If they were on I'm trying to think of a good round number here, and I'm not very good at maths. If they were on a certain salary each year, if I divide that salary down, I can calculate how much money the business is saving over those 2 months.
Yeah.
I can then pitch that for me to cover all of their responsibilities, I should be paid the bit of salary that is being saved for those 2 months, or a portion of it. So that's one way of looking at it, is the business is making a saving because I'm covering someone else's role.
Mm-hmm.
The other way to look at it is, what is the value in the responsibilities? If that person was a salesperson, I mean, that, nice easy lines, or if they were responsible for delivering products that are going to earn the company millions, then me asking for a bit of remuneration in recognition that I will keep those revenues coming is totally reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So the third scenario is, I'll do it, and it might put me under a bit of pressure, but I'm willing to, because as long as I'm appropriately valued for it. But of course, if we just say, yes, okay, I'll do my best, and I'm going to guess that that's what 80% of the people watching this do, that's what we do, we end up exhausted, overworked, run down, going off sick, not able to, be as effective a parent because we're at home, but we're churning all the stress of what's going on at work. So thinking about those other ways of approaching it, I think, is so valuable.
Do you think people that have got to sort of board level are as good at saying no as they are at saying yes? So they said yes to opportunities, but they've also said no to other things.
I know that they are. There's no are they. Learning to say no is the most important thing any person ever does for their career. And I say learning to say no effectively, confidently, in the ways I've just described, learning to position a no. And there are really sensible reasons for that. We don't respect people that say yes to us all the time and agree with us all the time. And people that work all hours cannot be at their best. They cannot be. If you are working under extreme stress, you cannot be effective. And there's good neuroscience in this, because when we're stressed, our prefrontal cortex, the most recent part to develop, the brainy part of our brain that does decision-making, attention, decision-making, attention, complex reasoning, it shuts down when we're stressed. Because back in the day, when we were cavemen and women, if there was a bear in front of us, all of the blood would rush to our narrow focus, reactivity, got to run fast, vital organs, heart, muscles. So that's what stress was for. It was to get us running fast or fighting, classic fight flight. When we're at chronic low-level stress, we reduce our capability to make good decisions. We reduce our ability to focus effectively, to reason effectively. We cannot be as effective in a professional environment when we're stressed. So if we are saying yes to things that mean we're overworked and stressed the whole time, we're making sure we're not going to be able to be as successful. We're going to make more errors. The other thing, and this is particularly prevalent amongst women, is our emotions catch us more often. So those moments when you get a piece of feedback that you weren't expecting and the tears start welling up, or you're giving the presentation and the fear is up and the blush, on your face, that you then feel kind of, everyone can see that I'm blushing and I'm scared and we've got the flush going on. All of that seems to be a particular side effect of stress and poor emotion regulation and physiological management amongst women. And it directly correlates to stress, whether that's stress because of fear induced by a presentation or upset induced by some hard words we're given. When we learn to regulate our emotions and physiology, we also downregulate stress. That is so difficult to do if we're feeling overwhelmed, too many plates spinning all the time.
Yeah.
It's doable, but it's a lot harder.
Yeah. Interesting. And then I suppose this is, this was so prevalent last week, wasn't it, with Jacinda Ardern, who left. I mean, what a big role. I mean, there isn't much a bigger role, is there, really, than being
There's not running a country.
Yeah. So, we're probably not, most people watching this will never get to that bigger role, but there is a fear, isn't there, that you see these people that seem to be working all hours and they don't seem to have a good work-life balance, and there is that fear of burnout and how you're going to fit everything in, and if you have other responsibilities. What would you say to those people that don't go, don't maybe feel that they're reaching their full potential career-wise because they're nervous about the knock-on effect that is going to have on their home life and personal life?
Yeah. So I think there are two sides to this. I think as you climb the corporate ladder, as you progress to more senior leadership, there's an element of inevitability to you needing to be, I'm going to say, more available more often, because as you go up the ladder, the stakes get higher. Just to give an example, when I was a deputy CEO, I had 300 odd staff at one point that I felt responsible for. I was responsible for their employment. And so that ups the ante a little bit in terms of your level of engagement, perhaps, and commitment. Although, funnily enough, as I think about it, when I had a team of 3, in my first management position, I probably felt that same level of pressure around those 3 being happy and productive. So maybe, I don't know, I'm thinking of Jacinda Ardern. I mean, when you're running a country, I imagine it's very difficult to draw firm boundaries because the stakes are so high. But for most of us, even progressing up a corporate ladder, it is not just possible, but also really important to have some reasonable boundaries. So, for example, I still took holiday
Mm-hmm.
and my work phone would be off. I didn't respond to work emails. When I was a deputy CEO, I didn't respond to work emails once I left the office, actually. And that's because I trained my organization into that being my boundary. And on occasion, I compromised that boundary when I chose that there was really good reason. And I'll give you an example. When COVID broke, I used to run a university, 200, 300 staff, thousands and thousands of students. The stakes were too high. It was too big. I was away for the weekend and I was involved in some discussions about, this is happening, that's happening. Although actually the general agreement was when I get back, which was on the Tuesday, that lockdown happened.
Oh my gosh, then, yeah.
I needed to pick everything up and run with it. So there was still a reasonable acceptance and permission around the boundary. What I want to say is that it's not that you can't still hold boundaries as you progress up the ladder. I want to make it stronger than that. You can only be successful in a sustainable way within your career if you learn to hold those boundaries. And in a way, what's just happened in New Zealand illustrates that beautifully. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable, by the way. This isn't about gender. It's not sustainable for anyone to work that way over the long term. What happens is if we ignore emotional symptoms, they become physical, which is why there are all sorts of issues around high blood pressure, cardiac issues, weight issues, addiction issues amongst many senior leaders, many. They're not spoken about, it's not seen, but they are there. People use coping strategies. Alcohol is often one of them amongst the most senior people. Whereas, and that's because they don't have boundaries. That's the alternative. But as women, when we aren't normally, again, being careful of massive, broad, sweeping statements, normally the primary caregivers, if we have children, we can't afford to not hold our boundaries. It's simply not sustainable. Something's going to give. For us, it's more likely to give emotionally first. Maybe for men, they're able to kind of dissociate from those emotions and press on until stuff becomes physical. So having clear boundaries is not just possible as you climb up the ladder. It's absolutely necessary if you want to have a successful career. It's probably one of the biggest focus areas of the work I do, is teaching women not just how to hold boundaries, but the very crucial nature of holding boundaries in order to get there. And it's for all the reasons we've talked about. You do not have executive presence if you're saying, yes, okay, yes, I'll just stay a bit longer and do it. That's not executive presence. That's not powerful leadership. sorry, I'm at risk of going off on a rant here, but I just want to say something about the word power. In my work, if I talk about empowerment, people are happy. The women I work with are happy with the concept of empowerment. If I talk about being powerful, often the women I work with are a bit like, I don't want to be powerful, because I associate that with stuff that I don't want to be about. But if you look at the dictionary definition of the word empowerment and the word power, powerful, empowerment is something we are given. I can empower you, you can empower me, whereas power is something we take, we choose. So I find it really interesting that people, women, are sometimes a bit, power, I don't like the idea of, but empowerment's okay. I would encourage you all, everyone, to think about being powerful. I don't have to wait to have permission. That's something I get to choose. And power is like any other tool. It's not wrong in of itself. It's not bad, depending on how you use it.
I love that. Yeah,
if I
yeah,
equip you
yeah.
with a knife, you can stab me in the back with it, or you can go and carve something beautiful, or you can put butter on your toast, right? Power is the same. And the reason I'm quite passionate about women getting comfortable with being powerful is because we are perhaps hardwired to use that power in a more compassionate, nurturing, communicative way. And that makes business better.
Because I suppose being powerful is not necessarily at the detriment to anybody else, because you're powerful. It's not made someone else weak.
Well, again, I would take it a step further. If you are powerful, that means you are in a position to influence things for the better for others. When I was running that university, the culture of the place was brilliant. It had a powerfully good culture because I was passionate about things being good for people. It was still quite a high pressure environment for everyone. It was very fast growing. But we made sure there was trust and transparency and authenticity, and people felt psychologically safe, and there was no game playing. And I had the power to make that happen. I took that, I used negotiation and communication and my talents and gifts to progress up to that level of seniority. And then I got to use it to make the business a better place. So for integrity-driven women who are so often fearful, well, if I were to go the next level up in leadership, probably be more stressful than I'm willing to take. I probably have to start playing the politics game. I don't really like who I would have to become. Imagine if you could get up there being your whole self and then use that platform of power to make sure that the business worked better than it does now. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? And consider that you can only achieve that by protecting the boundaries around yourself so that you're not working all hours and being really stressed. So you think that you're going to be really stressed, but imagine if actually you've got it completely the wrong way around, and the only way to achieve it is to be like Zen-like composure, boundaries,
Absolutely,
power.
Yeah. So the final question I have is about integrity, because I think that's something that people are probably aware of. As you get higher up, obviously we talked about the stakes are a lot higher. You've got a lot more influence on the company's bottom line, on the profit. You've probably got a lot more, if there's been so many redundancies recently, you might be more heavily involved in deciding, who keeps their jobs or not.
Yeah, that can be a tough one.
Yes. And so I guess it's about making sure that you feel that you're being true to yourself, true to your values, true to your integrity. And whilst also, I suppose, if you're working for a corporate, that corporate is there to make a profit. So how do people manage that? And particularly if they develop relationships with colleagues, and their decisions could negatively impact those colleagues if they have to let them go or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a lot in what you just asked.
Sorry.
No, it's good. And it invites a couple of what I hope would be useful tips and principles for people. So the first thing I want to do is share a model that I often share with clients. And I call it the on the bus, off the bus model. So the principle goes, in any given business, there are various decisions that might be taken. We need to do some layoffs, or we're going to start using children in India to make our shoes, or we're going to hold everyone's pay this year. There are difficult decisions taken in business all the time, and they have different motivations and different agendas. And sometimes we get the opportunity to be a part of those decisions. So the first thing I want to say is, if there is a consultation, a discussion, or an opportunity to influence those decisions, use your voice. If you can hear that there's going to be a decision that you actually feel quite strongly about, don't sit silent. Don't worry that mine's just my opinion. Use your voice. That's the first principle. Then so there's all this discussion going on. Then a decision gets made, right? And maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't. If you
and you
don't,
might not feel comfortable with, I suppose, if
you might not feel comfortable with it. If you do, exactly. The first thing to decide is, do I understand why they went with that decision? I'm not that comfortable with it, but can I understand why they did? And redundancies is a great example here. A business is like an entity. It's like a living body, and all the different people within that business are like the parts of that body. Our goal as leaders is to keep that body healthy. And if there are terminal commercial issues that mean we cannot support that many staff, redundancies sometimes are a necessary part of making sure a business continues to exist. And as a leader, I was always able to sleep at night, even when I had to make redundancies, on the principle that if I didn't make those redundancies, all 300 of those people could have been out of jobs. So sometimes there's a necessary sacrifice in the interests of preserving the whole. Now, let's be clear. Sometimes there's just let's slash and burn over there so that we can maximize our profits. That, very different reasons. Like, we need to do this to stay afloat. We're slashing and burning to maximize profits. So you've got to understand why they landed in the place they landed, and then ask yourself, can I accept this even though I didn't want it to go in this direction? And generally, with any business decision or any business direction, there's one of three places we can go to. The first is, it's okay. Either it's a small enough decision, pay is going to be frozen this year, I'm not mad about it, but I understand it, so I'm okay with it. Or there's, actually, I can't feel okay about this decision that's been taken. Now, in that moment, whether it's child labour in India, whether it's massive redundancies, and I know it's slash and burn or profiteering, in that moment, that's where the choice thing comes in. Get off the bus, because who wants to go and spend 8 hours a day in an environment where you feel angry and misaligned and mistrustful, and where you're completely not on board with the agenda?
Yeah, and especially if, it must be very hard then if you have to then sell that decision to your staff if you don't believe in.
Well, I believe you can't do that and be okay. So, I mean, a slight aside, one of the aspects of my career that has served me very well is, if I'm in misalignment, I'm off the bus. And I've never got too far out of alignment before going. Easy to say, not so easy to do. Although there are all sorts of strategies you can use to make sure you're a good leader, make sure that you have great relationships in place, make sure you use it as a bridge to your next opportunity. There's lots in there. But if you really can't abide by the direction of travel or the decision that's been made, do not stay on the bus, because here's the third place you can end up. And this is what is to be avoided at all costs. You become like the Walking Dead or the water cooler whinger, where actually you fundamentally disagree with the decision, but you're not got the courage to get off the bus. So you stay, but you make bad energy and bad noise. You make sure everyone knows you don't agree with that. They shouldn't be doing that. I don't agree with it. And it's utterly dysfunctional and unhelpful. So on behalf of the people around you, you're making everything worse. You'll also, I mean, if it's like a simple project direction, you'll often create a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure, that you think somehow, well, I told you it was a bad idea, but actually just everyone's a loser in that scenario.
Yeah.
But most importantly of all, it makes you miserable, and actually it'll make you ill. I run an exercise. I used to do it back in my corporate days, and now I use it as part of one of my programs where I have people arrive at their top 5 values, and then we go through a process where I brutally make them throw away some of their values. Back in the day, I used to whip out a bin and make them throw them in the bin. These days, I have like a fireplace that pops up on the screen that they have to throw the values into. But when we do the kind of talking about this after the event, people, and I say, how did it feel? How did it feel to throw away that value that mattered to you? What people say are things like, I felt sick. I felt so uncomfortable in my body. It becomes physical. If you are working day in, day out in direct contradiction of your values, you will make yourself ill. There's no two ways about it. It is not sustainable. So be on the bus, even though you didn't agree when the conversation took place. If it's a decision you can get with and understand why it's got to be the case, get on the bus, make it work, be a part of success. But if it's too big a decision, if it's too much against your values, if you cannot feel okay in that environment when it's taking that direction, get off the bus.
I love that. You
Get off the bus.
don't, you know, you always have a choice, and that's so
Don't
true.
stay and get into that awful negativity that comes with being in something you don't believe in. We give so much of our time, effort, and energy to our working lives. Don't underestimate the impact of staying where I was going to say where you don't belong, and actually that's about right, because someone who's more okay with big profits, someone who's more money orientated, might be fine with the fact that the redundancies are slash and burn and profiteering. They will thrive in that organization. We don't have to
They'll be
make
driving
that
the
wrong.
bus.
Exactly. We don't have to make that wrong. It's
Yeah.
just not for us.
Mhm.
You know, so that's the other thing. We often we want to make them wrong, like whether it's the company or the boss, or like, you have to be wrong for me to be right. You don't have to go there. We just have different values. It's a bit like relationships. You know, you end up with big to do with your other half, and we want to make them wrong. But sometimes it's just that they have a different value around how often the laundry should be done or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so think about fit and alignment and values rather than rightness and wrongness and judgment. But get off the bus if you need to be off the bus.
Love, this has been such a valuable conversation, Victoria. So where can people find you, connect with you, and learn more about the Success Smith and how you
So
can help?
thank you. I'm on LinkedIn, Victoria Stakelum, and the website is thesuccesssmith.com. It's one more S than you are expecting. I run regular masterclasses, so people can drop me a note on LinkedIn. They're usually promoted on LinkedIn. Let's connect. I always love to build my network. And so there are monthly masterclasses on these kinds of topics where I go into more detail on some of the skills that we've talked about. And we also offer, for anyone that needs it, a free opportunity to do a deep dive into where you are at within your career. And that's for full-time, part-time, flexible, wherever you're at in your career, where you'd love to get to, whether that's career progression or just more balance and harmony and peace within your career, and how to get there. And we will share details of the programs I run that help women create these breakthroughs for themselves, which are pretty powerful. Our average salary increase at the moment is 30%.
Oh, wow.
For the women that are targeting new jobs or salary increases, we are averaging 30% increases without more overwhelm and more stress. In fact, quite the opposite. We're going down to 3-day, 4-day working weeks, much more harmony and balance, and these big pay increases. So it's really effective work.
Fabulous news. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll put all the links on. As usual, the replay will be available on the website, and there will be all the links there. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone that's watched live and on the replay. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.